My name is Jay Malinowski. We are sitting here this morning. This is November the 15th, 2024. We're sitting here with Jerry Zimmerman, retired from the Colorado River Board of California and other things. And this is part of a 2-decade-long project called the Oral History Project. We're at Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and we appreciate their help allowing us to come in and take these interviews. The interviews are unedited. If you're watching this, the interviews are unedited. These were not intended to be movies. They're just simply oral records of people that have had significant influence on Colorado River issues. And so, with that introduction, Jerry Zimmerman, thank you very much for joining us today and being part of the project. My first question is, let's talk a little bit about your background and how you came to be here, but how you came to be part of the Colorado River Board of California. And you're somewhat unique in the people that we've interviewed in that you have extensive experience in the upper basin. So let's start there and talk about that.
My first job out of college was with the Wyoming State Engineer's Office. And there I worked for the Wyoming Water Planning Program, developing Wyoming's plan to develop all of the water available to Wyoming under the various compacts, including the Colorado River Compact. And so worked on Wyoming's state water plan for 3 years. And we developed a plan to develop all the Colorado River that Wyoming was entitled to all the water is entitled to from the Colorado River.
What year are we talking about?
We're talking about 1970 to 1973 when I worked for the Wyoming State Engineer. After we wrapped up the Wyoming Water Plan, there was a new organization, the Missouri River Basin Commission, that was just being established as a federal state water planning organization, where the chairman of the Missouri River Basin Commission had the authority to bring in the Bureau of Reclamation, Corps of Engineers, and other federal agencies to make sure that it was coordinating planning with the various states within the Missouri River Basin. As I mentioned, there were 10 states in the Missouri River Basin Commission, 10 federal agencies, and 3 compact commissions that were represented. And I worked for the Missouri River Basin Commission for about 10 years. And then it was winding down, and so an opportunity to work for the Upper Colorado River Commission and represent Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico on the Colorado River. So I applied for that position and was able to go in as its executive director. It is located in Salt Lake City, Utah. And so I worked for the Upper Colorado River Basin Commission, again, for about 10 years, telling California no. And
When you say telling California no, let's talk about that for a minute. Because on the one hand, I appreciate the fact that there's a joke in there, but on the other hand, that's some pretty serious stuff with regard to California dealing with, the lower basin, but primarily California dealing with the upper basin. What was that like? I mean, when you say telling California no, okay, no to what?
to further development, yes, we needed to protect Wyoming's and the upper basin's interest in the water that is available within the Colorado River. It's just like when the 1922 Colorado River Compact was negotiated. The fear was that California in the lower basin was developing faster than the upper basin, and they were going to take all of the water, and the upper basin would not be able to develop in the future because all the water would be being used by Arizona, and especially California and Nevada. And so as we looked at the operation of the Colorado River system, including, Lake Powell, Lake Mead, you wanted to make sure that you were able to store water in the upper basin reservoirs and did not have to release it to the lower basin. So some of the programs that California and the lower basin were suggesting, Wyoming and, the 4 upper division states felt could impact their ability to develop future water. And they saw that there was opportunities for future development in the upper basin in the oil and gas industry, as well as they anticipated further growth and potentially more agriculture within the upper basin. And they needed to preserve the ability to develop their compact share in the future.
While you were with the Upper Basin, how would you describe the atmosphere between the Upper Basin and the Lower Basin? Was it were the basins willing to talk to one another? I mean, was it cordial, or was it really loggerheads? Or in the 70s, what was going on there?
Well, this was in 1980s. By the time I was with the Upper Colorado River Commission, it was in the 1980s. And no, it wasn't loggerheads like it is today. It was, you were able to sit down and have candid discussions. But some of the programs that were being proposed by the lower basin, the upper basin felt could impact their ability to develop future water supplies. And, the Bureau of Reclamation, the lower basin, wanted to release some of the water out of Glen Canyon Dam. And Steve Reynolds from the upper basin and Felix Sparks and some of the others within the upper basin were saying, no, we need to fill, because they were still filling Glen Canyon Dam. We need to fill Glen Canyon Dam. You can't have further releases from Glen Canyon Dam until it is completely full. And if you remember, in the early 1980s, we had flooding on the Colorado River. Some of that was because they didn't make anticipatory flood control releases to keep Glen Canyon down a ways to give some room for the additional runoff. And with those high runoff years, we almost lost Glen Canyon Dam, the spillway, because...
In fact, in the 1980s, maybe 81, isn't that the year they actually put plywood?
81, 82, yeah. And had plywood on top of the spillways in order to keep it from going through the spillways, because there had cavitation and had lost parts of the spillway.
Yeah, in fact, there was, as I recall, there was significant damage in one of the
yes.
Well, you said when I used the word loggerheads, and you indicated that maybe it's a little different now than it was then. Is that accurate? Is it more contentious today?
It's more contentious today than I have ever seen it within the 7 states in negotiating.
No, that's an interesting point. Why would that be, after all of these years of people getting to know each other and people talking to one another and people attending the Colorado River Water Users Association? I mean, you would think that after 20 or 30 or 40 years, people would be learning to talk to one another. Why is it worse now than it was in the 80s?
Well, one of the reasons is with the climate change, you have less water in the river. People have to take action to conserve water to be able to meet the current needs within the available supply. And the upper basin still hasn't developed its full compact allocation of 7.5 million acre feet. It would like to have the opportunity to develop more water in the future. and do some of the transfers that some of the agencies are talking about. You know, the Lake Utah, the Lake Powell pipeline, take more water from the west slope to the east slope in Colorado. There are opportunities for settlements in New Mexico with the Indian tribes, et cetera. And so water is more scarce today than it was then. But, you know, I keep thinking about, you were talking about being more cordial, more interaction in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s and today. You know, Dennis Underwood, who was the director of the Colorado Board of California before I came to California, he and I got along well. We had some great conversations. And I really learned to respect Dennis and his views, and I think he learned to respect the views that I was taking as representing the Upper Colorado River Commission. And I guess that's what brought me into California, is the relationship that I had with Dennis Underwood. And when Dennis became the commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation and left as the executive director of the Colorado Board of California, I said, you know, that's a job that I would like. I see where California wants to move forward. The Upper Basin, in my view, even at that time, wanted to stay where they were. Didn't want to look at what are some of the opportunities that are out there and available to really operate the Colorado River system for the benefit of the entire region. And I saw where Dennis and the Colorado River Board were looking at the future and saying, you know, there's opportunities where we can work together to benefit both the upper basin, the lower basin, and the entire river system. And so there are win-win solutions out there. All we have to do is to talk about what is very important to each of the states, each of the basins, and have that candid dialogue. And there is a solution someplace in there.
Okay, that's a great segue. And by the way, as a matter of record, Dennis Underwood is the subject of one of these oral histories for anyone that wants to go back and watch his. The record is there. So now let's talk. You packed up your car and moved from Salt Lake to Burbank, California, to manage the Colorado River Board. You switched from the upper basin to the lower basin. You switched from saying no to California to living in California. Tell us what that was like to make that change. I mean, that's a major change for anyone. How did
that was, to be honest, that was the most fulfilling thing that I did in my entire life, is move to a place where the people within Southern California wanted to do something. And they wanted to move forward and accomplish something rather than and they were looking at the future. Other places, you know, you were doing planning, you were looking and doing plans that you would put on the shelf and probably most of them will never be pulled off. But within California, there was an atmosphere and an attitude, let's accomplish something. Let's do what we can to make our lives better today and also protect the future.
So some of the major events that occurred, as I recall, while you were there, maybe we can talk about a little bit how we got there. One of them was ramping down to a conclusion of Arizona v. California. The conclusion didn't happen while you were there, but you were moving toward that. Maybe talk about that a little bit in your dealings with Arizona. And then maybe we can talk a little bit about the IID water transfer was occurring around that time, because it's not unusual today, but at the time it was pretty much groundbreaking, no pun intended. So let's talk about what you learned, or how you dealt with Arizona v. California, which was the longest running Supreme Court case in history. And where was that sitting when you came to California? And was there any activity going on with regard to that?
There wasn't a lot of activity going on with regard to Arizona v. California, you know.
But weren't there some Indian rights settlements that had to be folded in there? And
Within the lower basin, within California, all the rights had been essentially settled. And I guess in 2005, you had a little bit of addition. I think it was 2005. In that time frame, the Krishani Indian tribe got some additional present perfected rights out of Arizona v. California. But other than that, most of the rights had already been quantified in 1964 through the Supreme Court decree. But I think one of the first major things that I really worked on was the Lower Colorado River Multi-Species Conservation Program, which gave the three lower division states, Arizona, Nevada, and California, the ability to divert water and have incidental take permits. And we had both Section 7 and Section 10 authority for that incidental take. And we had California, under the California Endangered Species Act, the ability to take those species as well. It was a major program that took, 9, 10 years maybe in the planning. And the really beginning of that program was on a bus tour of the Upper Basin. The Colorado River Authority, which is the agencies from Southern California that are on the Colorado River Board, we're taking a tour of the Upper Basin, looking at what's happening in the Upper Basin with the salinity control program and other activities within the Upper Basin. And Tom Levy, Bob Schempp from the Metropolitan Water District, Bob McCullough from IID, and I were sitting on a bus, and we were talking about, we need to have the authority to continue to divert water and have the necessary incidental take permits as we move forward with some of the things that may be coming on the horizon. And we were sitting in the back of the bus, writing on paper, and as soon as we'd come to a stop someplace where they had a fax, we would fax that document in. They would, secretaries would type it out. Next place we went to, fax it back. We worked on that in a bus, and that was really the beginning of the Multi-Species Conservation Program, which ultimately became a 50-year program to give each of the contractors within the lower basin the ability to continue their operations and to make the necessary transfers. You were mentioning IID and working with Metropolitan on some of the transfers to bring conserved water from Imperial Valley into Southern California. That gave the Section 7 and Section 10 compliance to make those kinds of transfers and more transfers in the future. We build in significantly larger transfers.
Was there opposition to that?
The major opposition was from the Fish and Wildlife Service. They wanted, within that Multi-Species Conservation Program, a huge program that was astronomical. It was just outside the funding. But as we worked within Southern California, and it was the agencies within Southern California that worked together to develop that, we developed that program, took it to Arizona, had a meeting with Arizona. Arizona was somewhat skeptical in the beginning, and to Nevada. And then we took it to the Fish and Wildlife Service in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the director there, and met with the director and suggested to the director, you know, what you are suggesting just isn't going to happen. And if you don't work with us and do this large program that will really do good for the endangered species along the lower Colorado River, you aren't going to have a program. And he was able to convince others within the Fish and Wildlife Service that this was a good start, this was a beginning, this would begin the program to ensure the biological integrity along the lower Colorado River as continue to operate the reservoir system and as development move forward within the lower basin.
It seems to me that one of the issues that you had to deal with as the manager, if you will, of the Colorado River Board of California is that your board is made up of members of multiple agencies in Southern California that are, maybe the conflict isn't the right word, but they're all after the same water. I mean, you've got Metropolitan and the other agencies, and that's your board. Talk a little bit about how that worked in terms of governance and in terms of structure. And what I'm talking about is that you've got people on your board and they have their own, it's a zero-sum game. I guess that's where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
And so how did that work on your board? And how did you get along with that?
And that was one of the joys that I had in working in Southern California and working for the agencies. You know, as you indicated, Metropolitan and San Diego and Metropolitan IID had odds. But when it came to what is the best for California, they could be in litigation, fighting. They would come together and say, you know, this is the best for California if we go this way. And so they were able at that point in time to say, you know, we'll continue to fight for what we want as an agency within California, but in representing California, we're willing to come together and take this position as we go to Arizona, Nevada, the upper basin states. And that was what I really found very pleasing to me is we would have meetings, and sometimes I would have meetings with Metropolitan here, San Diego here, IID here, Coachella over here. And when you were talking about the quantification settlement agreement, that's the kind of discussions that were occurring. You would have them, and then you would bring two agencies together, have those discussions, see how those two agencies might agree on a position that California would take. Bring in another agency, bring in all four. They would have caucuses, and over time, as I said, California was able to come together and have a unified California position as we took it to the other states, federal government, and it was very rewarding. I felt that was an atmosphere that was really good.
Can you talk a little bit about the the quantification settlement agreement, how its significance, because it is, and what it took to get there?
Just what I explained, what it took to get there. We even hired Abe Sofair to come in and be a moderator or try to get the agencies together. He had supposedly a reputation of getting an agreement between Israel and Palestine. It was a small agreement, apparently, but it was able to negotiate an agreement there. He gave up on the Californians. But But he didn't spend as much time, and that's what, he started it, and we just continued what he had started. And as I said, when you sit down, I believe when you sit down and have candid, open discussions among not only the managers, but the technical and legal staffs, and really go through the issues that each agency has with where you're going, and they all come together, there is a sweet spot someplace in there. And that was what I really enjoyed, is that for programs like the QSA and other programs within California, we were able to find that sweet spot. And the same thing was true with the Basin States discussions, like on the 2007 guidelines, or before that, the interim surplus guidelines. You sit down and have discussions, you're able to find that sweet spot because you have the right people in the room talking, and it's not just one, today it's kind of one person from each state talking. I personally believe I've had advised people in California, that's not the way to come to a mutual conclusion. You need all of the actors there so that they can hear firsthand what the other state or the other agency is saying, so that everybody fully understands the full scope of the issue and where people are coming on an issue, so that you can arrive at a conclusion. And, what I would say is I have been blessed in working for the Colorado River Board, that I have had excellent staff that helped me prepare for, the discussions and negotiations.
If we could, since we've talked a little bit about the QSA, could you define the quantification settlement agreement? What did it do?
What it did, the quantification settlement agreement, the Section 5 contractors within California came together and agreed on, this is a quantity of water that I'm limited to. IID, instead of, at that point in time, California was using 5.3 million acre feet. We had to get down to 4.4 million acre feet. California's basic apportionment under the decree. And so the Section 5 contractors were meeting to discuss what quantity of water can I come down to where we can live within the 4.4 million acre feet. The ag agencies have an entitlement to 3.85 million acre feet. Metropolitan has the remainder of the 4.4 million acre feet. So you needed IID to be able to limit its use and come down from a use of 3 million acre feet to something like 2.6 million acre feet, 2.7 million acre feet. And these numbers may be wrong.
You're in the ballpark, though.
Yeah, but it's in the ballpark.
And what's difficult getting to an end point with regard to the QSA?
It was not an easy task. You had the California legislature, you had the federal government, everybody involved in it. The Colorado Board was involved in it to some degree. And I say some degree because at certain points, some of the agencies believed that it may be a conflict of interest for the board in that, we represent all of the agencies. not just one. And so, but I was involved in a lot of the discussions and negotiations, as was the board staff.
Changing track just a little bit, when you started with Colorado for Board California, how did the Upper Basin, because you had a lot of relationships in the Upper Basin states, obviously. How did they react to your taking the job down here?
Well, I think somewhat jokingly, they called me a traitor. So we don't want to talk to. But I think what it did is I understood where the Upper Basin was coming from. And they knew that I understood where they were coming from. And so it gave me and others the blessing, you might say, that if you know where another person is coming from, you're able to say, we can't go there, California or Lower Basin. The Upper Basin will never go that far. They may go a little ways. And I think that was beneficial in that I have always heard you want your enemies close and know your enemies the best. That's true. That is, I believe, a blessing when you can fully understand where the person you're negotiating with, where they are, where their bottom lines may be. And I think they recognize that, and I've always had good rapport with the Upper Basin as we were going through the discussions. Pat Terrell, Larry Anderson, Scott Balcom, et cetera.
While you were in California, Colorado River Board, let's talk about some issues that you may or may not have had any influence with, and I'm talking specifically about the Salton Sea. Now, the Salton Sea today in 2024 is probably worse off than it was 20 years ago.
Well, most definitely.
It continues to recede. Did you? And that's a problem. Did you have any issues, or were you able to deal with anything regarding the Salton Sea while you were on the board?
When I was on the board, we were given the task to develop a Salton Sea report. We developed that report and essentially put it on the table. We viewed it at that point in time that was outside what we needed to be looking at as a board. It was a distraction to do something with the Salton Sea. But in fact, what we have learned since then is that the Salton Sea is key to California. It is key to the entire basin. And I think we have convinced the other basin states, if you are having transfers from IID to metropolitan, the Salton Sea is going to get smaller. That is a major problem for Southern California if we don't address the Salton Sea at the same time that you are trying to get transfers from ag agencies to urban agencies as there becomes less water going into the sea. As you indicated, it gets more saline. You have more playa exposed, more dust. The allergy, as I understand, it is the worst in the Salton Sea area. People are suffering from asthma, et cetera. And so now the Salton Sea has become a major topic in all of the discussions as you move forward with moving water to where it is needed within California. And we have, I believe, fully convinced the other basin states and the federal government that as we operate the reservoir system, you must look at the Salton Sea and the impact there and take care of the Salton Sea as we take care of the water needs for the urban ag industrial needs within California as well as the lower basin.
Have you ever given any thought to what a resolution might be with regard to the Salton Sea? Given your expertise, what would you do if you were king of the water world?
I always thought that bringing water from the Gulf into the Salton Sea and maybe generating some power as you make the transfers to and from the Salton Sea would be good. They've looked at that. They've found that that's probably not economically viable program, but that was something that I thought that would work, and I continue, as I do have a couple degrees in engineering, that an engineering solution might work, but right now they do have an extensive program in addressing mitigation around the sea, and hopefully that will address some of the major issues.
Part of your job with Colorado River Board was dealing internationally, and what I mean by that is Mexico, which is a partner in the Colorado River. I believe there was at least one, maybe 2-minute items that evolved during your tenure. I may be wrong about that, but
yeah, there were 3 of them.
and we've also got the Yuma desalter, and you've also got issues with regard to the New River, with the New River flowing out of Mexico into the Salton Sea, and it's kind of a mess. In fact, I think 60 Minutes did a thing on the New River last year and called it one of the most or the most polluted river in the country. Were you involved in any of those resolutions or solutions or meetings? Again, Yuma desalter, and I'm not sure about that. Minute items with regard, I think, to water quality, and then New River issues. Bring us up to date.
I was involved in Minute 318, 319, 320, 323, I think. No, I have had numerous meetings in Mexico with the counterparts of Mexico, and what we've been talking about with the states and getting together, I found the partners in Mexico, once you really begin to explain the issues that we have, because Mexico is really part of the lower basin. Whatever is released from Glen Canyon Dam has to supply the lower basin within the United States and Mexico. And so we all are very interested in the water supply that is available to the lower basin and Mexico, and I see you kind of thinking, Jay, if you look at the release from Glen Canyon Dam, that, from an engineering perspective, that will identify what the firm yield in the lower basin is. So whatever that release is, that's the average annual release. That is the water that's available for the United States and Mexico to develop. If you have low releases from Glen Canyon Dam, because you only have so much inflow, so you add the inflow, the Gila River, as you know, is dry most of the time. So there's very little water coming in from the Gila River, very little from the Bill Williams. You get a few storms that add a little bit of water, but the firm yield for the lower basin in Mexico is totally dependent on the releases from Glen Canyon Dam. And if you look at the releases from Glen Canyon Dam under the 22 Compact, they say the minimum objective release is 8.23 million acre feet. If you look at the lower basin, our basic apportionment is 7.5 million acre feet. Mexico's basic apportionment is 1.5 million. That's 9 million acre feet. So right there, with the losses from evaporation, phreatophytic use, et cetera, you can't develop 9 million acre feet if you have that compact minimum delivery of 8.23 million acre feet. So we have a structural deficit within the lower basin of 1.2 to 1.5 million acre feet.
And that goes really all the way back to the compact in 1922, to draw an analogy, when they divided up more water than was in the river.
They were thinking there was 21 million acre feet or so available for development. Under today's conditions, that is way off.
You are off on a slight tangent, talking about Glen Canyon. There's a lot of pressure today, not a lot, there's some pressure today to empty Glen Canyon and tear down the dam and do without it. Do you see that, given our requirement to deliver water to Mexico, which you just discussed? Do you ever see that happening, or is that just a pipe dream of someone that's a possibility?
Well, I believe that's a pipe dream. And how do you go from floods to droughts? You need to have reservoir storage to have the available supply. How does the upper basin make its delivery obligation at Lee Ferry under the 1922 compact without any reservoir storage? So the reservoir is good to capture if you have, and I firmly believe we will have another year with a natural flow of 21 million acre feet for 1 or 2 years. And then you're going to have 6, 7 million acre feet for 3 or 4 or 5 years, maybe. You need the ability to capture that high flow in reservoirs. The upper basin needs Glen Canyon Dam in order to meet its compact deliveries to the lower basin. It can't make compact deliveries to the lower basin without that regulatory storage at Glen Canyon Dam. We need Lake Mead to be able to capture flow to meet our monthly, annual deliveries, not only to Mexico, but to all of the agencies that divert water from the Colorado River within the lower basin.
Okay, let me zigzag just a little bit more here.
That's my humble opinion from an engineering background. That's what I would say.
And that's why you're here today. Did the New River pollution issue ever come up, or was that just something that was not solvable and was pushed off to the side? And when I say problem, what I'm really talking about is that the contamination that flows into the Salton Sea in the New River. My understanding is that it's a problem with Mexico. Was that ever discussed, or is there a resolution there?
It has been discussed. Is there a resolution? If you want the Salton Sea to go down faster, that's probably a solution, because if you do anything with that on the New River, you're going to have less water flowing into the Salton Sea. Mexico has suggested that it may sometime clean up the New River and take all that water. If Mexico does do that, you have that much less water flowing into the Salton Sea, which will even cause the sea to go down faster.
Oh, well, that's a difficult problem then, because you've got water flowing into the sea. That's a good thing, but the water's...
It's contaminated. Yeah.
It's a bad thing.
That's a bad thing, but yeah.
Is there... Well, okay. That one will go
Good.
unresolved for the time being. Any other, how long, tell me how long, or tell us how long were you with Colorado River Board? How many years?
I was with the Colorado River Board for 20 years, from 1990 to 2010. However, I still am needling into some Colorado River Board issues from time to time. I'm actually a retired annuitant with the board. And
Okay.
at this point in time, I'm not sure how much longer that'll last.
Well, aside from the issues that we have talked about today, think about that 20-year period. What were some of the major issues that you had to deal with that we haven't talked about over that period of time? That
I think we have covered most of the major issues. The Lower Colorado Multi-Species Program, the interim surplus guidelines, the 2007 guidelines. We were beginning to talk about the quantification settlement agreement, which is huge because that allowed us to enter into the 2007 guidelines and show how California was getting down to its basic apportionment of 4.4 million acre feet. Without that quantification settlement agreement, the transfers, the conservation that was identified within the quantification settlement agreement, California would not have been able to, well, we would not have been able to get to the 2007
right.
guidelines.
If memory serves, the major transfer programs that occurred while you were at the board, one of them was with Palo Verde Irrigation District and Metropolitan, and the other one that I recall was
San Diego was part of the quantification settlement agreement because conserved water, and that was part of the negotiations. Does that conserved water go then to Metropolitan, or does it go to San Diego? And through the negotiations and the discussions, that conserved water is wheeled by Metropolitan to San Diego.
I'm sorry, are you talking about the Palo Verde water or
No, the IID water.
IID water?
All the Palo Verde water goes to Metropolitan.
Were you in the middle of the Metropolitan Imperial San Diego discussions? It seems like that might have been a difficult time.
Well, that's what I said. At times I was involved in trying to get them together. At times they felt that it was not the responsibility of the board. And, as part of the quantification settlement agreement, Coachella had its flags out on how much water that it needed as part of the quantification settlement agreement, and that was all part of the discussions as well.
Didn't Coachella frequently, and I'm talking now specifically about Tom Levy, didn't they always kind of stand in the way of, not in the way, but they wanted their piece of the action with regard to transfers because they were next on the priority list after IID.
Well, they are junior. They're a junior like Metropolitan in that Coachella is junior to all of the ag agencies, and the ag agencies have 3.85 million acre feet that is apportioned to them, right? And Coachella is junior there. IID, Palo Verde, BARD, the PPRs are all senior. And so you can say that Coachella is a junior, and that's why Coachella was insistent that it needed to have a certain amount of water, and within the quantification settlement agreement, Coachella got some water from IID as well. Excuse me.
Let's.
And and you mentioned Tom Levy.
Yeah, that's right.
Tom Levy was
Yeah, that's right. That's
very instrumental in a lot that has occurred on the board and within Southern California. And as I mentioned, Bob Shemp, Bob McCullough were very instrumental as well as attorneys from all of the agencies.
And again, for the record, Tom Levy is also on file with the Oral History Project from several years ago when he retired. What I'd like to do, since we talked about Tom, talk about briefly about some of the personalities that you had to deal with. And I'll throw out some names, and you'll have others. But Tom Levy certainly is one. He's general
Right.
manager at Coachella. What was your relationship with Tom? He was a tenacious guy.
He was, and I really enjoyed working with Tom. And as I think I just previously mentioned, Tom planted a lot of seeds that came to fruition. Maybe not the way Tom originally envisioned, but what Tom, as you said, was very opinionated. But he was really nice to work with, and I really enjoyed working with Tom.
How about you had to deal with Metropolitan, and two of the people there that two of many people there that you had to deal with were Myron Holbert, who
Well, Myron Holbert was before my time,
that's
because Myron Holbert was the executive director, and then Dennis Underwood, and then I became the executive director.
right. But Myron went to Metropolitan as assistant general manager, and so you had to deal with Carl Bronte.
I dealt with Carl Bronte. Carl was good to work with.
And as you mentioned, Dennis Underwood, who went to the bureau, and you've already stated that you have a pretty good relationship with them. How about who am I leaving out? I'm leaving out the folks at IID. And,
Well, yeah, Bob Shemp from Metropolitan, your attorney at that point in time was.
well, we had Karen Cheeky.
Well, I worked with Karen, but before Karen was.
Bob Will.
I worked with Bob Will, but not as part of that. But yeah, okay.
Okay. And then you also had to deal with Southern Nevada Water Authority. How was that relationship? Because they were they tended to be pretty aggressive.
Pat Mulroy was very aggressive, and I'm not going to. I was going to tell a story about Pat, but I'm not going to. I can do that in private, but not not something to be. But no, I really respected Pat Mulroy. She was very tenacious. I had media at the time we were in some of those tense negotiations call me and want me to say something bad about Pat. My response every time was, Pat is representing the state of Nevada. She is doing a great job at doing that. And that was my response rather than get into personalities that statements that would be printed in the press. And I guess one of the things I always tried to do when I talked to press was not be quoted, because I wanted to stick to facts rather than go where they wanted you to go.
Okay. Anyone at Palo Verde come to mind that you especially enjoyed working with? Bart, maybe?
Oh, I really enjoy working with Bart, and as you know, Virgil Jones was a chairman of the board for a while from Palo Verde, and enjoyed working with Virgil. Ed Smith was always good to work with. Ned Hyduke and JR, came later in PVIDs, and enjoy working with them.
And how about Arizona? Any special people over there that come to mind who were important?
Well,
important to you.
Yeah, well, I worked extensively with Herb Gunther, who was the director of the Department of Water Resources, Larry Lenzer with DWR, CA, CAP,
Attorney Snow,
Bill Swan.
Bill Swan. Yes.
Yeah. And he also worked with Bill Swan, really liked to work with Bill Swan.
Okay. Well, what have we forgotten? I'm just gonna throw this open. If there's anything we forgot to talk about, anything that in your career with respect to the Colorado River that important to you, throw that out there. We'll give you a minute to think about that.
Well, I would like to highlight that, I had the opportunity to, and I think you are going to interview this person for an oral history, and that is Chris Harris. I had the opportunity to hire Chris Harris from Arizona, and, the relationship that we discussed between the upper basin and me moving to the lower basin and how that was advantageous. I think the hire of Chris Harris from Arizona was advantageous to California. Chris has represented the Colorado River Board in admirable ways in everything that he has done, from environmental program manager to the executive director of the board. And also working with Fred Worthley on the board staff. Came from Fish and Game. That was a nexus that helped us as we dealt with the Fish and Game issues within Southern California as we were doing the MSCP and other things. Fred and the ties that he had to the fish and wildlife, fish and wildlife in Southern California.
Okay. Well, that's it. We thank you very much for your time, Jerry.
Yeah, I thank you, and I apologize for stumbling through all this. I didn't do any research. I just came in cold.
That was really the point. It gives us, I think, more of a human look inside rather than, pre-programmed responses to questions. No, that was great. We appreciate your time, appreciate your expertise, and thank you for being part of the project.
Oh, thank you.